Welcome to Thursday Book Club. I'm coming to you from Gadigal land and I pay my respects to elders past and present. For anyone new, my name's Suzanne Leal. I'm the author of 6 novels, most recently The Year We Escaped and The Watchful Wife. As many of you will know, we started Thursday Book Club during COVID in 2020, remember that? And it was a way to connect readers online and also, to be honest, draw attention to my book, which was released on the first day of COVID. And 5 years on, we're still here, which is in fact, no, not quite, almost 6 years. What we do is we meet weekly on Zoom, and every month or so, I invite a guest author to come to talk to us and for us to talk to them. If you'd like to join the community and haven't yet, just go to my website or join on my Substack, and that'll give you all the details. But to business. So tonight I'm really delighted to be in conversation with Kyra Geddes, whose latest novel is this beauty, The Story Thief. It's I've been listening to it as I often do, and it's got the most beautiful voice. It's My Brilliant Career-esque. It's mm, not Anne of Green Gables, but it's got that really historical voice that is authentic, but easily able to identify with. So I loved it. So welcome to you, Kyra.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. I'm really happy to be here. So thank
Excellent.
you.
Very, very nice backdrop. Is that a real backdrop?
That is a real backdrop.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's
that's just part of the books. And like many people in this group, I probably have as many books on my to be read shelf as on my actually have been read shelves. But yeah,
very nice. And where are you coming to us from today?
I'm from North Shore, so that's uh, I'm going blank at this minute actually. But yes, I'm in the Sydney North Shore in Gordon.
I remember like sometimes, when you're at these cocktail parties, which I quite like, and I'm quite good at getting into a group. I'm not very good at getting out of it. And I'm really bad at remembering names. My best friend, my daughter, my husband. So so you're in good company here, Kira. Okay, so look, what we're going to do something a little bit different today because Kira's got a PowerPoint presentation, and I'm going to show documents and or show the PowerPoint and ask Kira some particular questions. Before we start that, um, if I hadn't read The Story Thief, how would you describe it to me?
Okay. Well, I think probably one of the best, that's, the classic question asked of an author, and sometimes other people say it better. And in fact, I liked what the Sydney Morning Herald said. They said it's a family saga that doubles as a feminist reimagining of Australian history and literature. And I think that's what I was trying to do, is to kind of create two books in one. So on one level, we've got the fictional and hopefully quite emotional story of Lillian and her life, and we follow her life. And then on the second level, we've got a bit of the story of what I'd describe as Australia's coming of age in that first half of the 20th century. So it's set in the years 1900 to 1954. And as I'm sure we'll talk about, a lot of things happen in that time. So it is a kind of two stories in one, which is my excuse for why it took me nearly 10 years to write.
Well, I can understand why it took 10 years when I read the research you did and the books you read. It's I find of the books that I've written, the historical aspect is the hardest. And in fact, when you get the idea for a historical book, you sort of wish you didn't have it because
Yes.
it's so hard to then get those daily life details right. Well, what did you find hardest and easiest about writing a book that's set, a good 100 years ago?
Yeah. Look, I think I'm somebody that I can only write if I feel I've come from a point of a lot of knowledge. And so it takes a while for me to get to that point. And I don't like to do it secondhand, but of course I can't go back into the past. So my starting point, and answers probably the question you asked off air just before, is my starting point for all of the research was to immerse myself in the writing of the time about which I was writing. So for me, the greatest truths are found not in history books, but in fiction. And so if I was, as I said, it's set from 1900 to 1954. So the chapters where I'm in the early 1900s, well, that was when I was reading Miles Franklin, My Brilliant Career, Henry Handel Richardson, The Getting of Wisdom, where she's in a boarding school in Melbourne, in her case, in the early, well, it's the turn of the century for her. So, and same thing, I just worked, as I wrote the novel, I worked my way through what I would say the classics of Australian literature, some of which I'd knew before, many of which I didn't. But I can honestly say that for at least 5 years, I read nothing that was written in this contemporary time. I literally had my head in, 100 years or 80 years or 70 years in the past. And so I think that's how probably I was able to capture that classic kind of voice, because that's where my head was for so long.
So could we say that you're perhaps the Nicole Kidman of the writing world, the method actor or the method writer? So just completely immersing yourself so you get that tone. I must say for the first book I wrote, Border Street, it was based on loosely based on the story of my landlord, and I'd interviewed him, and it was so long ago now that it wasn't AI generated the transcript. I had to type it on those micro
Yes.
dictaphone. Sounds like 5 centuries ago, doesn't it? But what it did, and it was hours and hours, it gave me the rhythm of his voice.
Yes.
So I think the voice that I got for him, I knew the rhythm because I'd spent so much time transcribing. Are you saying that reading fiction from that time does a similar thing?
Yes, absolutely. It really did, because what I wanted to do was, yes, there were all these major world events occurring, Federation, women's suffrage, World War One, World War Two. So I wanted to hear how the writers who were living through those times and those events, how they described them, not just how it felt to them though, but also the language they used, because
Yes.
language evolves, obviously. And so I became yeah, I really wanted to flavor the whole of my novel with authentic language. And, I became slightly obsessive about it too, so that even when I would be writing something, say something came up like the word, I remember this, slumber party. Well, that word, if you do the way I would work out whether that word existed in 1920, my method in the end was actually to go on Trove to the newspapers and magazines and do a search for it there and see if it came up in articles. So a lot of my language I took out of novels, but in some cases, yeah, if I had gaps, I would 100% make sure that that word was in actual common usage then. So yeah, pretty I was correcting the copy editor. The copy editor would try and correct me sometimes and say, "Oh, I think that's anachronistic," or that, and I'd say, "No,
Mm.
it's not. It's there. It is."
I
So yeah,
spent I don't know, like days trying to work out in 1940 how you would mop a floor, like
yep,
what contraption there was for a mop. And it can just take forever, and it goes unnoticed, but I mean you can bet your bottom dollar if you don't do it, it'll be caught out.
yes, yeah, exactly. And I think that's a lot of the pleasure. And I think, I mean, I would never have thought that I was going to write historical fiction. I've enjoyed novels that are historical novels, but I would never say that that's a genre I particularly focused on. It was simply that I had this idea for the story, which we might get into a bit, but which has its starting off point or its launch point as Henry Lawson's story, The Drover's Wife. And because of where that was set and because of the story I came up with, I was forced to write a historical novel and
Mm.
discovered a very great love for research in the process, and many many happy hours spent down rabbit holes.
But when do you stop? I mean, because you could research for the rest of your life. When did, and I can see a smile from Jane Smith, who's also a historical novelist. Um, do you give yourself a cutoff, or do you just it just takes what it takes?
I gave my I really did not give myself very strict rules at all. I think, and that's the problem. Well, that's both the joy and the problem of a first novel, isn't it? There's nobody looking over your shoulder. There's nobody asking you for it. And so it just took as long as it took. And I, it's funny, one of my school mum friends is actually Leanne Moriarty, right? So I was very lucky to have Leanne in my circle from the beginning. So she knew what I was doing. And, one day we like went out for lunch and talked her through the story. And she's like, yes, I can totally see it. Yep, I can see it. And then she goes, but that would be too ambitious for me. And I went,
Wow.
because she saw what I couldn't see on day one, which was just the task I'd set for myself.
Yeah.
But in the end, she said, look, just don't worry, just stay in your lane, just go about it chronologically, just go chapter by chapter, let the editors come to it later and work out if they want to swap things around. And we didn't do that at the end. It's not a dual timeline, it is a chronological story. But yeah, I just plugged away at it chapter by chapter by chapter. And then I suppose what's interesting, if you look at our lives, and I think, maybe it's a cliche, but our lives are lived in chapters, right? And there are periods of time where we could almost skip over it. Young children, you're in a blur, you hardly remember it. And then there are periods where it slows down. And so I kind of wanted to look at my character Lillian's life and Australian history in these sort of moments. So there were some, there were periods that went slower and faster than others, but it was a chapter by chapter. And interestingly, when the publisher pulled it all together, because I have a confession to make here, when I had finished writing, it was 200,000 words long.
Like the trilogy, isn't it?
That was what I had in mind, but no,
Yeah.
the publisher said, relax in your slacks there, Kyra. We need to make one book successful first.
And just to keep everybody in the loop,
Yeah,
of course, a book like yours, which I
yeah.
think sort of falls between literary and commercial, how many thousand would
So
you be
we
expecting?
we ended up with 126,000.
Oh, that's pretty big, actually. That's
Yeah,
a
so
deal.
it is pretty big. They would have liked it to have been nearer to 100,
Yeah,
particularly for a debut novel. They say, readers they may not want to invest that much time in a novelist they don't know.
right.
But I really did take 200 down to
That's
126. I sort of took it down to a bit over 100, and then they had me write more things. So, yes, there are a lot of chapters that went, and a lot of things. So I don't have a spare novel in the drawer, but I have a lot of chapters in the drawer. So
uh,
yeah, just
excellent.
as painful, I think.
I'm going to turn now to Henry Lawson, not because I love Henry Lawson, and I must say that I know everyone loves, or the public seem to love, or the public writing world love The Drover's Wife. I never really did, but your book has given me a new perspective. Oh, look, as Leah Purcell's
Yeah, yeah.
did as well, but it's given me a really different perspective on The Drover's Wife. Now, just while I get this shared screen up, can you just for those people who need a bit of a refreshing on Henry Lawson, what is The Drover's Wife and why did it interest you?
So Henry Lawson, as almost everyone would know, is one of Australia's best known storytellers, and The Drover's Wife is probably his best known story. It was written in 1892, and it depicts the sort of iconic bush heroine. So we meet the drover's wife. She's living in a remote outback New South Wales. It doesn't say New South Wales, but a remote outback place. Her husband is away droving for long periods of time, and she's left alone with the kids. And we meet her one evening, just as she's about to put the kids to bed, and a snake rears its head up from the floorboards. And she needs to work out what to do about it. So she bundles the kids up to go to sleep on the kitchen table. And she stays up all night keeping vigil with a club in one hand and a snake dog by her feet. And while she stays up, she, I guess, recounts in her own mind, and for us as the readers, the trials and tribulations of her life on the land. And, she's a tough woman. She's fighting fires and dams breaking and cattle diseases and swagmen. And so she is this iconic bush heroine. And yet, what bothered me about the story is that she remains unnamed,
Mm.
as do her two daughters. Whereas the two boys, Jackie and Tommy, are given their names, and even the family dog, Alligator, is given his name. So it lends itself to a feminist retelling, and much like a Shakespearean play can be retold from different perspectives or in different, time and place. The Drover's Wife is that story for Australia because there are literally hundreds of different versions or interpretations of The Drover's Wife in story form, film, play, postage stamps, everything, you name it. So, mine is kind of the latest and the longest in that history of retellings. So shall I say in a nutshell what my retelling is, or did you want to
Yes.
talk Henry
Yes.
first?
Well,
Or
I suppose what I was going to ask is it's interesting that Lillian is born in 1892,
yes,
and that's the year that The Drover's Wife is written or published.
yes.
What links Lillian and The Drover's Wife in your book?
Yes. So most of these retellings of the drover's wife take the perspective of the drover's wife. But mine takes the perspective of the little baby girl resting on the left hip of the drover's wife in Lawson's story. And I call her Lillian. So in my retelling of Lawson's story, Lillian is born in 1892 as the daughter of a drover, and she lives in the red dirt country of outback New South Wales. And we meet her first as a little 8-year-old girl. And the only spoiler really that I'll give there is that on that day, the rest of her family succumbed to a bushfire. They were all killed in a bushfire. And Lillian's sent to a convent boarding school in Sydney, where she takes comfort in books and dreams of an independent life as a teacher. And it's there at school that we next meet her at the age of 16, when Lillian reads in class Henry Lawson's story, The Drover's Wife, and based on all the parallels with her memories of home, including her brother's names and so on, she's immediately convinced that Lawson's story is based upon her family and that her mother is the original but unnamed and unacknowledged drover's wife, which is why she sees Henry as the story thief. And all of that sets Lillian on a path to reclaim her family story. And that's the journey we go on with her then.
Well, how did that come to you? Did you have a dream? Did you just wake up? I mean, how did you draw that link and think of
Yeah,
that as a novel?
yeah. It was a little bit of all of those things really. So it was during I was at Macquarie Uni. I was doing a mature age Bachelor of Arts in English and creative writing, and it was one of my sort of later creative writing subjects. And we read The Drover's Wife, and it was the first time for me to read it. And we also read some of its best known retellings. And there was something about the story that just grabbed me.
Mm.
Not that to be honest with you, not that I particularly loved it in a sense. I'm not a Henry Lawson fan. It's not, I don't really read bush heroine stories. It's not my thing. But something about the story grabbed me and I couldn't let it go. But as I said, my attention was turned to the little girl. So, yeah, it didn't come to me until later why that was. Do you want me to say why it was now, or are you going to hold it off?
We'll park it, but yeah, I'm with
Yeah,
you.
we'll park
Yeah.
that. We'll come back to that. So even in that class, I actually started writing little chapters and scenes or some scenes. They didn't end up getting used, but it did kind of just come to me. It
Mm.
really came for me. And then I think as the next semester went on, by the end of that, I'd mapped out the story. And then I had another year still to go of uni. And by then I had this seriously detailed plan, but then I went on the path of actually researching and writing. So it was learning on the job. No matter how many things you study, how many books you read, how many creative writing courses you do, I think writing an actual novel is a case of learning on the job.
And tenacity, isn't it? You
Yes,
just
yes,
head down and you just sort of like a bulldozer, just
yeah,
bulldoze through and then see what you've got. So what I'm interested in, we might come back to these, but I'm interested in you.
yeah.
So, Kyra, tell me a bit about your family background. And I'm talking about your grandparents and your
Yes,
parents now.
yeah. So both of my parents are German. Well, my dad was actually is half German, half Italian, but both mum and dad came from Bremen in Germany's north, which is near Hamburg. They were born during World War II, so 1941 and 42. So they were babies in the war. They had their homes bombed out. My mother's father was killed in the war. And interestingly, my mother was raised by her mum and her two older sisters. So she grew up in this very feminine, female sort of household, but with a lot of hardship, post-war hardship. And my parents, they met at work as teenagers in the early 60s, and they got married in 1963. And my dad kept getting called up for military service, and he didn't want to do it. And so they were up for some adventure, and they thought, what's the most adventurous place we can go to? And that would be Australia. So the Australian government was offering free passage to skilled workers at that time. Neither mum or dad had they hadn't been to uni or anything. There was no money for things like that, but they had a skill. They had, like, my dad was an industrial buyer, it was called. So they came to Australia, started out in Bonegilla and then Melbourne. But then after a couple of years working for German companies, they thought, well, this is nowhere near adventurous enough. And then my dad had in his head, he'd heard about Australian opals. And funny, I think it's almost a bit like Henry Lawson's father, who was a Norwegian sailor who came in search of gold. He got off the ship basically and became a gold seeker. My dad got the opal bug. And so mum and dad, they left their little house they'd just built in Melbourne, and they went to this tiny little opal mining town in South Australia called Andamuka. And they ended up living there for 7 years. And my first 2 years were there. And so those images, which I think you've shared the screen, have you, Suzanne?
Yes, I have.
Yeah. So, I think I did not dawn on me until a couple of years into the writing and research, but I think I must have subconsciously seen myself in the little infant girl, in the red dirt, literally, quite literally, playpen in the red dirt. And my mother pushing the pram, because even there's a line in Lawson's story about, the mother gets dressed up on Sundays and dresses the children and pushes them in the pram. I can tell my mother's clothes, she's really quite well dressed for the desert, I have to say, although my grandma looks a bit poor. I don't know what my grandma must have thought about why her son-in-law took her daughter to this godforsaken place. But so I think that is why the story got to me. That is why.
And how long did you stay there for?
Well, they were there for 7 years, and I was there for my first 2 years. And then thankfully, my dad realized a lot faster than Henry Lawson's dad that there actually wasn't much money to be made in opals. And he got out, and we moved to Adelaide for a couple of years. He was still selling opals for a couple of years, and then he totally changed tack, and we moved into Sydney, and he moved into an importing business in the pet books and fish food and all sorts of unusual things. But I did bring a little show and tell. I don't know if people
good, yes.
Here, I'll stick it right in the screen.
That's
Can you see that opal ring?
I might just stop the sharing for the time being.
Yeah,
We'll see if we can get a bit of screen. Oh, it's gorgeous. Look at it. So what's that history? Tell me the history of the ring.
So my dad actually cut. So dad was from being a purchasing officer or industrial buyer and all those sorts of things, he instead taught himself how to cut opal and to shape it and be a dealer. So he would buy the loose parcels of uncut stone. So they just looked like little sparkly rocks, and you didn't know what you had. And there was and then you would take it, and then you'd cut it on the special equipment that he learnt to do, and then and then sell it. So but the money was out of the industry, but it's nice to have a special little family.
Yeah, that's quite a large ring.
That's a really big one. Yeah, you won't see many opals as good as this one. Here, I'll show you on the ring size. You can see the size. It's nearly up to my knuckle.
Wow. And so he put the diamonds around, and he designed
I know he didn't set jewelry. So it used to have quite a bit of an unattractive claw setting when my mother had it. And then for my 40th birthday, we gave me a present to have it reset in a more contemporary way. So yeah, the diamonds around it. So it's a bit too good, frankly, to wear to most things, but I thought you might enjoy because we were talking
Oh,
about
it's
opals.
fabulous.
I thought I'd show you. Yeah.
In fact,
And it's
my
interesting. So the Andamuka comes up for opals. So because when Queen Elizabeth came to Australia in 1954, and she did her grand tour everywhere, they gave her a gift, and that was called the Andamuka opal.
oh,
Absolutely massive. Was absolutely massive. But yeah. So yes, that's kind of Andamuka's claim to fame. But
fun. It's funny. My eldest son was working at the Aboriginal Legal Service in Dubbo when we went to see, and also Walgett and doing the
yes, yep.
circuit. And we went to Lightning Ridge, which of course is also
Yes,
an
that's
opal
right. You
farm.
did that just last year, didn't
I
you?
did, I did, I
Yes.
did. It's
Yeah.
fascinating, fascinating. So,
Yeah.
I mean, having seen that, I mean, just imagining your parents, these, Germans from Bremen,
I know.
finding themselves in the opal
Well,
field.
it was a really interesting community of all immigrants, mostly immigrants actually, and a lot of Yugoslavs who'd come and had worked on the Snowy Mountains scheme. And then when that finished up, a lot of them went. Really, people had opal fever. Like, well, yeah. So
So I understand that, I mean, obviously, Henry Lawson is a poet of the dust and the bush, and I can understand that you have a knowledge of that, if not from your own memories, then from what your parents have told you and being in South Australia. But it's a book very much about loss, and it's a book about Lillian struggling to come to terms with the shock deaths of her family and finding herself alone. Um, is there anything personal that attracted to you to that particular theme?
yeah, there is. So it's on my mum's side of the family. So as I said, she was born during the war, so she lost her father at a young age. So I think that absent father thing probably played itself out. But then my mum, I think coming to Australia as a young woman, she was 23 or something when she came with my dad to Australia. She carried, I think, a terrible guilt for leaving her mum and her sisters, like could go the other side of the world. They only wanted to go for a couple of years. And of course, they never went back. In fact, the first time they went back was 10 years later because the
Oh,
price of airplane travel at that time was like a house deposit and they didn't have a lot of money. So she felt a lot of guilt for leaving. And then to make everything worse, mum sort of went through a few tragedies. She had these two older sisters, as I said. Both of them ended up passing away at quite a young age, one at 40 and one at 44. They were like 10 and 12 years older than mum. So around the time mum was in her late 20s, early 30s, both her sisters died. And she also lost a little baby before I was born, 2 years before, little boy. And I think somehow it shouldn't be something that made her guilty, but I think she had this kind of a guilt, particularly for leaving her, for that she had come to Australia and had made this new good life, and that her mum was then all alone. And so that notion of, and I think even the fact that her sisters had, yeah, one had breast cancer and one had leukemia, even the fact that she was like the one who, the lucky one, and it's a funny, I do use the term of survivor guilt, and obviously it's probably not the context we're used to hearing it in, but the emotions are the same. She felt bad for being the one who kind of had made this new life. So I took a lot of those feelings and those losses. They really informed Lillian's emotional
mm.
journey in the novel. And then to make it matters worse, I actually did lose my mum during that period as well. So
Oh,
right at the start of it, actually in 2016. So she was still alive when I'd mapped out the book, and we went together to the National Gallery in Canberra, and we looked at Russell Drysdale's painting of the drover's wife because that also plays a big role in this novel. So she knew what I was going to do, but she wasn't around for any of the writing. So I think, yeah, mothers and daughters and love and loss and taking comfort from art and from nature. Those are the themes that I meditated on and that sustained me during that 10-year journey. And, hopefully they made it onto the page. So, yeah.
Tell me, when you and your mum were talking to each other, was your language German or English?
It was the mixture. So my parents, I grew up, I spoke German first. My parents never spoke English to me. In fact, they tricked me for a while and told me they didn't know how to speak English. So, so I only learned English from the kids in the neighborhood when I started going out on the street, as we did used to go playing out on the street back then. And then when my brother came along 4 years later, he and I spoke English to each other, and it became clear that mum and dad could understand it. But our language to this day, because I've still got my dad, is they would speak in German and I would answer in English.
Mm.
So my comprehension is A1, and my speaking's quite good. Like I probably just come across as though I've got limited intelligence if I go to Germany. Because my vocab's a bit limited. But
And because
and
it's
my
mild,
grammar, I make mistakes in my grammar, but yeah. But
and
it's
I
got,
think perhaps you're mired in a language that um, your parents left the country, and so I find when I speak to Germans who left just after the war, the language is slightly different, and also the concept of the country is.
yes.
And also if you're learning as a child, then the language can often, or at least stay primarily as a child's
Yes,
language.
definitely. Yes, my cousins always laugh at me with my slang, and they say, "Yes, you sound just like your father." And my dad's sister came out here recently, and she told my dad off, and she said, "You're more German than we Germans now. You haven't moved on. We have, like."
Yes,
So
yes, yes.
so
It's
yeah.
interesting. When I was at school and learning German, there was a group, a German, I think it was East German women's group, and it was maybe on the cusp of the wall coming down. But for them, Germany was still, even like, years and years later, that separated country because that's what they'd left. And that's what had kept in this time capsule in Australia. And do you think was a little bit your parents' experience as opposed to what their relatives were in
Yeah,
Germany?
yeah, I think so. I think so. But though my parents were, I think growing up, I would hear my mum would sometimes be a bit critical of Australian cultural things, or that she kept telling about how there was only one kind of cheese when they came to Australia. But that said, that said, they they both felt extremely lucky to be here, and they knew it was a privilege to be in this country. And in fact, my dad literally just last year became an Australian citizen
Oh,
because Germany only just relaxed the rules to allow you to have the dual citizenship. So,
interesting.
yeah, so no, it's interesting.
Look, we're just about at time, but I'd really love it if you're happy to answer any questions that come through our chat line. So while you're thinking about everybody, for some questions for Kira, no pressure, but also encouragement. Kira, do you have some book recommendations for us? We are a book club.
Yes,
We like to
yes,
read.
yes, I do. Would you like some classic books or things I've read more recently? I can do either.
I would like to make no more choices.
No more choices.
Yeah.
Fair. Okay. Well, let me give you more
Okay.
recent options that I've read. I mean, I do love anything art inspired. So I was enjoy. Where is it? Oh, I don't need to bring it up. But Heather Rose's new
Oh,
novel,
is
A
it good?
Great Act of Love. Yes, I liked it very much. I liked her earlier one, Museum of Modern Love.
Mm.
I didn't realize how many novels she's written, but it's very beautifully written, set in Tasmania, and addresses some of her own sort of dark kind of family past, convict sort of past. So I really enjoyed that, and I also enjoyed David Dyer's novel I just
Oh,
read,
David's great, isn't he?
Kingdom of Dust.
Yes. Yeah.
So I don't know if anyone's heard of that, but it's kind of a reimagining a little bit of the moon landing in 1969, and I thought it was a brilliant story, and so much deep, intelligent, philosophical exploration, as well as all the technical mastery of what goes on inside a space machine. So I highly recommend that for something different. And then I've just had the privilege of reading a new novel, which is not yet out, but it will be. So by Diane Yarwood, her debut novel was The Wakes, which was very good, but her new novel coming out in a couple of months is called Margaret, Are You Leaving? And the line
Oh, what a great
goes,
title.
yes, it is, and it comes from a Gerard Manley Hopkins poem, and it is also a story about mothers and daughters and love and loss, but completely different and very, very powerful. So, Margaret, Are You Leaving by Diane Yarwood.
Excellent. Oh, what a great three recommendations. Got a couple of questions. Now, I know we've gone over the time, so if people need to leave, you know how it is here. You come when you like, you leave when you like, and hopefully everyone has a good time. Okay, so the first question is from Jen. Historical research sounds daunting. How did you logistically organize it? Was it Excel?
Okay, that is a good question. Yes, I'm a very organized kind of person, but the I used Scrivener. Who I don't know who's familiar with Scrivener, but it's a software tool that a lot of writers use, and you can use it to kind of set up a novel in chapters, but it also lets you hold everything. So basically, every single book I read, every research source I read, I made summary notes of. So they were all in Scrivener too, as were all the chapters. So that was my key organization tool. It was therefore all in one place. And then I had physical folders as well, and too much to even think of. They're now in the garage in a whole big filing cabinet.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, I use Scrivener too. I think a lot of writers, I can see Jane. Jane, do you use Scrivener? No, doesn't.
No.
I think there's sort of two and like some people love it, some people don't like it as much.
Yeah.
We've got a question from Geraldine Mellett, whose book has just come out, which is fabulous. Things I Cannot Say. And Geraldine's question is, Kyra, congratulations, what sounds like a fantastic novel. Given that you said you were learning on the job and writing over 10 years, did your style change in that time? And how did that work out in terms of reviewing it at the end?
Yeah, that's a really good question, actually. I think, yes, actually, two big answers to that, or two answers to that. One is that I probably, because I probably my reading tastes err on the more literary side, I probably set out wanting to write a literary novel. And I probably started out being a bit try hard and a bit literary. And then as time went on, I allowed myself to lean into a slightly more, emotion is okay to put on the page. And in fact, it was actually at a certain point, I was in the World War II chapters and I actually read Victoria Perman novels. So I broke my rule and I read something contemporarily written about the past. I did it as a litmus test to see whether I'd done World War II properly. And she's got a lot of emotion and sentiment on the page. And it was almost like it gave me permission to loosen up a little bit. And so I did let myself loosen a bit. But then the second major stylistic change happened at the 11th hour, which was that for all of the years I'd been writing, the entire time, everything had been written in third person. So she. It was a close third. We were in Lillian's head, but it was she. And then at the very 11th hour, when I was submitting to a firm press who published me, I just was testing something out and I thought, oh, I wonder how it would sound in the first person. And I tested out a chapter and I went, oh my God, it's so much better. It just opened everything up. And I then had to redo the entire book. Yeah, I know. So they were two very major changes. And it's not that I hadn't considered that at the beginning, but I think I'd had to go down the path. And yeah, so that was a very big change, very big change.
It's interesting because that's not as unusual as you might think. So a friend of mine years ago, I think she'd written a book in the third person, and a publisher said, "Yeah, we're interested, but do it in the first." And I don't think she followed it up. But for my book, Running with Ivan, that was in the third person when it was acquired. And the first email I got from the publisher is, "How do you feel about the first person?"
Yeah.
So that was also, I mean, it's a shorter book, but that was, and it's true. It brings you close, and for children, I think it really lets you live in the character. more
Yes.
than third person
It
can.
did, and yeah, it does give you that voice. And I think though when I was writing it, I think I almost had to start in the third person because I felt like I was going to put too much of myself into Lillian's character.
Yeah,
And by making her someone separate, I felt I created her character. But by the time I'd finished, it was fine to
take it
switch
back.
to first person because she was a fully evolved person by then, and she's not me, so that was okay.
Got another question from Jen, and Jen's question is, after 10 years, how did it feel to have to let the book go? Was there any grief or just
Yeah,
joy?
that's interesting. Yes, I have to say, as I said, I let myself write so slowly and pleasurably through all those years. In contrast, the editing process I found highly traumatic, and I mean that. And
Really?
I'm not highly traumatic because I had to write under pressure because they made me remove so much, like all for good reason, right? I'm not saying otherwise, but I had to remove so much and then I had to write so much. And I was doing it at speed, and at a certain point, I thought I was going to just fall apart because I was at the desk, 16 hours a day. And I said, oh, maybe could I have a little bit more time? And they said, yes, but then the book will come out one whole year later. And I was like,
Yeah.
no, I don't want that. So I really did virtually injure myself. Like it was not good for my health getting all that done. And so I think, if anything, I probably have some, maybe other authors do this too, but there's a little part of me that goes, could I have done a better job? If I'd given myself more time, could I have done it better? And then I just have to try to say to myself, you did the best you could, and it went through sets of hands. And but it's hard with the book because once it's out there, you can never change it. It's gone. It's done.
And I think there's a saying that a writer never finishes their book; they just have them take it, have it taken away from them.
I think that's
So
probably
there's a point where you've
yes, yes.
interesting.
But these are great questions. Thank you.
Oh, good, good. No, it's a fabulous book, and it brings so many things together. And look, I loved it. In fact, I was re-listening to it today, and she's like a bit of a friend, Lillian, but a friend from another time, in that time travel
Yes,
time. So, so I'm mindful of the time. I'm really pleased that everyone could come tonight, and for people or friends who didn't, it'll be on my YouTube channel. And Kyra didn't get to find out what's happening next, but maybe next time we'll do that.
next time exactly. Thank you so much, Suzanne, and thank you all for coming. It was lovely to meet you. Thank you.
See everybody next week. See you. Thank
Bye.
you.